Hi, it's Adam from Months and PCs, and today we're going to be building a very own gaming PC. Now, if you haven't built a gaming PC before, don't worry, we are going to take this through step by step so that you guys know exactly how to do it. If you don't know what parts you should be going for, make sure you check out our video up here, which does go through the parts that we've got here today and things to look out for when you are getting your components. Let's get into it. So just a quick reminder for those that don't remember what parts we're going to be using. We are going to be using an i5-10400F processor. We're going to be putting that into the B460 Plus from Asus. We've got a Asus Tough Gaming 1650 Super graphics card, a CV650 Corsair power supply, a 500 gig M.2 NVMe SSD, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 to 400 megahertz RAM. We then got our own cooling solution that we're going to be using. That's the Freezer i13X from Arctic, and we're also going to be putting in a Wi-Fi card as well. So first of all, you need to clear your area and make sure you've got a nice clean flat surface that you can work on. Ideally, you want to be working on a wood surface just so that it doesn't have as much conductivity. But if you do have an anti-static mat, that would be fantastic to put down right now. So a couple of things to watch out for when you're building your PC. The big thing is going to be static. So you need to try and find a way to ground yourself. Now you can get anti-static mats that will have wrist straps that you can put on that attach to the mat and they keep you constantly grounded. Now being in the UK, we do have an earth wire to all of our plugs. So what I generally do, we'll plug in our power supply, not turn it on, but I then got an earth to the power supply. So I can touch this and it just takes any static out of my body, so there's less risk of causing any damage. So you are going to need some tools. Now I have got an IFixit kit, and in here it's got all the different screw head types that you're going to need. It's also got this piece which I find comes in really handy once the motherboard's in there, that bends around and allows you to screw awkward screws in. We've got our tools ready, we've got our power supply plugged into the wall but turned off so that we're grounded. We then need to get our core components to build onto the motherboard first, and then we're going to put that into the computer case. And the reason for doing this is it just makes it a little bit easier to put on the motherboard when it's outside of the case, so that there's less to do once it's actually in there. So there's going to be a couple of things that you're going to need out of your motherboard box. Obviously your motherboard. You're then going to need your I/O shields to put into the case, but we'll deal with that in just a little while. M.2 screws, you're going to need these, particularly if you have got the M.2 SSD. And then you've got your SATA cables. Now we haven't actually got any SATA devices going in, we haven't got any SSDs or hard drives, so I'm not going to need these, I'm going to leave them back in the box. So when taking the motherboard out of the bag, I like to put it on top of its anti-static bag and the box just to give us a little bit more of protection. So the first thing, we're going to install the brain, and that's the CPU. So this is an Intel motherboard. AMD is a very slightly different way of putting the CPU in, but it's the same sort of principles. So we've got this lever here that we just need to pull out, and that then lifts up. Now you have to be very, very careful when you're dealing with Intel CPUs and installing them, because all of these little pins here, if you break or bend one of those, your motherboard is more than likely not going to work. So we'll take our Intel Core i5. So on the CPU, there is a small gold triangle, and we need to ensure that that gold triangle lines up with the triangle on the motherboard. Now this motherboard was actually quite tricky to see, but if you're unsure, just have a quick look at your manual and it will tell you. So just gently place that in, don't put any pressure on it, just make sure it doesn't wiggle around. Now we keep this plastic cover on, so when we slide that down, make sure it's sitting underneath this screw, and as you push down, the cover pops off. And that is your CPU installed. So next we're going to install the CPU cooler. Now first thing I like to do with the CPU cooler is just take off the front fan, which should usually just clip off like so, and it leaves you with a heatsink. Just gives you a bit more room when you're installing it onto the motherboard. Now Intel motherboards don't have a back plate, so you will need to take everything out of the box, find the back plate that is supplied with it, the screws, and then we're going to install it. Now I'll show you how to do it on this motherboard, but if it's slightly different, do check the manual and it will show you how to do it. So we've got the back plate and we just need to flip the motherboard over to install this. And this is why we've not put the RAM or anything, just the CPU in for now. So this needs to just sit onto the motherboard like this. Now there are already holes drilled out so that these parts of the screws can come through from the original small black plate. Now, it does have in the box some screws and little washers here. Now, most motherboards should already have a little ring around here that is grounded, but that's not going to necessarily be the case all the time. So just to be on the safe side, you are best to put these on to ensure there's no risk that you're going to make connections with anything and short the motherboard. So once they're all on there, you take your back plate. As I said before, make sure that these are lined up and gently slot that into place. Now we need to hold it from the other side. So I'm going to make sure I'm grounded before I touch the motherboard again. Just to make sure there's no risk, we need to screw in a little standoffs, and this will then hold it onto the motherboard. So I'm just going to gently screw them in, not too tightly to start with. But as you do tighten them, try and go into a diagonal so that you're putting the same amount of pressure across the board rather than just on one side of it. So next we're going to take the brackets for the heatsink, and we are going to just slide these onto here. Now this particular CPU cooler can be set up in various ways. You can have the air sucking in from the bottom, pushing out the top, from the front, pushing to the back, and that's the way that we're going to be having it, just because we're going to have 3 fans on the front pushing cool air in, and I want the cool air to go straight through the heatsink and then back out the back of the computer. So we're going to set it up this way round, and then we need to tighten these little thumb screws on here. Next, it's time to install the heatsink. Now, on the bottom, there's a bit of plastic, so we just need to make sure we take that off. And this has got thermal paste pre-applied to it. Now, I am going to see the temperatures with it, and if I'm happy, then this should be fine. But sometimes I do wipe that off and put on Thermal Grizzly or something like that, just to make sure that it is as good as possible. So we need to make sure that it's orientated the right way round. So the fan sits on the front here. We need to line it up, gently push it down, and then we need to screw these into place. And this is where your IFixit Tool Kit comes in particularly handy. So when you're screwing these in, you just want to do a little bit each side until it starts feeling tight. You don't want to be doing too much one side. Again, you don't want to be putting too much pressure on one side and not enough on the other. Now what this will do is it will push the thermal paste onto the CPU and spread it out nice and evenly, making sure that that's not going to go anywhere. Fantastic. So now this is all installed and we know that that's secure and safe, we're going to put the CPU fan back on. Now, when putting the CPU fan back on, usually you want to just be seeing how long this cable is, where it's got to go on the motherboard, and how you're going to be able to route that round. Now for me, the CPU fan is at the top here, so I'm actually going to leave it where it is so that I can just run it along the bottom out of the way to keep the cable management nice and tidy. So this will just clip on one side, clip on another, and there we go. Our fan is clipped on, and I'm actually going to plug it in now so that I don't forget to do it a little bit later on. So just push it onto its little header. So once your CPU fan's all installed, next we're going to install the RAM. So we've got 2 sticks and we've got 4 slots. Now generally speaking, you don't put them in slot 1 and 2, you'll put them in 2 and 4. Check your motherboard manual and it will tell you which way to put them in. Now you'll see on your RAM you've got a little notch. That notch needs to be lined up with the notch on the motherboard. So there's usually a little clip that you just slide back. Now this will then line up with that notch, push down until you hear a click. Okay, so then we do exactly the same again, slide that in until we find the notch and audible clicks, and your RAM's installed. So next thing we're going to do, we need to install our M.2 SSD onto the motherboard. So we're going to need those little screws that I mentioned earlier that came in the motherboard box. So we're going to install our M.2 into this M.2 slot. So we need to get one of our little standoff screws. So we will screw this into place. So we'll take the drive, and you just need to make sure that it is the right way up. It will only fit in there one way round, so you just push that in, so it clicks all the way in. So push that down and screw it in. So now we've got the core components on the motherboard. That's the CPU, the RAM, our storage, and the CPU cooler. We can get rid of all of this. and then it's time to bring our case up. So first things first, let's get the side and front panel off so that we can access everything in here, take anything outside of the case, and then we can start getting to work on it. So the first thing I wanted to check was just making sure that the fans are set up in the correct configuration. So these fans are set to pull air in. Now if you're not sure which way round the fans go, always the side with the logo or without any sort of plastic on is the side that the air comes in. And then the other side where you've got the plastic, this is the side that the air comes out from. So that's going to be the direction of airflow in through the case. Now, when you're installing your case fans, whether you're having them on the front, the top, or the back, what you want to make sure is that your cables are over the back side of the case. This means that when you're cabling managing, you can literally just pull them through the little holes and you won't see any cables from the front of your case. Obviously, if the cables are this side, you've then got to try and route them behind the fan or across the case. It starts to look a little bit messy. That's your first step when you are doing cable management, how to try and keep your case nice and tidy. So let's take a look in at the back of the case. So we've got all of our cables currently running through this channel. The cables that we've got here, so we have got a SATA power. Now that's going to be for our RGB on the fans. You've got your audio for your front panel, USB for the front panel. So this case has got a USB-C connector as well. Now we're not going to be plugging that in because this motherboard doesn't have a USB-C connector on the motherboard, but this case was more for the design of it, that the client wanted this design as opposed to functionality. So that was the main reason that we went for this one. So a couple of things that I'm going to do back here. This is our drive bay here. Now I am actually going to push the drive bay just over to the next slot. It will give us a little bit more room with our cable management. Because we've not got a radiator at the front, that's not going to be any issue with clearance there. So I think that's going to be the first thing that I'm going to change. So to take the drive bay out, it's just these little screws here. Now they are actually in there quite tightly. So what I'm going to use is my IFixit kit. We can then pull this forward. And I'm going to actually move it over to this drive bay here. And then I can hopefully just screw that back into place. Nice and easy, just like that. So that gives us all of this room now to play with for our power supply, and then cable management can be in here as well. So next we need to install our I/O shield that comes with the motherboard. This will go with the pointy bits on the inside of the case, and it just goes up where the I/O shield, and that pushes into place. Now do be careful because these are particularly sharp, and if you're going to hurt yourself, this is going to be the point that you do it. And now that's snapped into place. So once we've got our I/O shield and everything, I've laid the computer case down because this is a lot easier then to deal with it. So we need to make sure that our standoffs are ready to hold the motherboard. Now this case has already got them set out for your standard ATX. If you're not sure where they need to go, you can have a look at the menu, or you can just hold this down to the motherboard so that you can have a look and see where the standoffs need to go. So for me, I've actually only got 6 slots, so I don't need these 3 here. So I'm going to take these out. Now in your iFixit kit, you do have a fantastic tool that will help you get your standoffs out, because these can be a bit stiff at times, particularly if you're in a cheaper case. So now we've just got the standoffs in the places that we need to. So we then just need to put the motherboard in, lining up with the standoffs. Just being careful not to get any of the metal hooks attached. If you are on a cheaper motherboard, the I/O shields aren't necessarily the easiest to line up, but you'll feel it once it's been done properly. You'll feel it sort of click into place. You should then be able to look and see all of the standoffs in the correct positions on the motherboard. So you may have a few different types of screws in your case, but the screws you want to be using for the motherboard are the ones that are a little bit rounded at the top with a little bit of an edge. So these are the screws that we're going to be using for the motherboard, and we just need to screw them into each of the standoff points. Again, just start off gently in case the board does need any form of repositioning. So once you know where your screws are in, just tighten these up nice and tight. Only ever hand tight, don't use any power tools for this part. because we don't want to be breaking the motherboard. There we go. So our motherboard is now well and truly secured into our case. So next, before we put the power supply in, I am just going to try and organise some of these cables, see if we can get some things plugged into the motherboard and tied up out of the way ready, so that once we've got the power supply cables, we're just plugging them in and ready to go. So firstly, I'm going to focus on these cables here, which are coming from our I/O panel. So these cables, we have got our USB, an audio, the power LEDs, the power switch, the reset switch, and then our USB-C. Now there's no USB-C on the motherboard, so we just need to keep this one out of the way so that we can just push it underneath at the end. Now what we need to do is find out where all of these cables plug into on the motherboard so that we know where is best to put them in the case. So these are the cables that we need to plug in. So this connector here, which is our USB, is actually just up here, so we can route this from this side panel and plug this into here. Our HD audio, now audio is normally down the bottom. Yep, so our audio's over here, so I can run that along across to the bottom, and that's over here. Finally, our power switches plug into this one here, so I know that this cable needs to come up through this slot. So firstly, let's do the USB. So I know that that's coming from the side, and that is plugging straight into the motherboard here. Next, we'll do our HD audio, which we are routing down the bottom of the case, and that's coming out here, and this just plugs in to this one. So that's our HD audio front panel. Next, we're going to do these horrible little connectors. Now they all do come separate. I'm not sure why they don't put them all together, but we then need to plug them into this little slot here. Now this is particularly tricky if you've not done it before, but you just need to have a look either in your manual or on the motherboard. It does show you which slot goes on to where, and then plug these in. So a little bit fiddly, but once you've sorted that out, you can push them down to keep that all neat and tidy. So now we've plugged in these three cables on the front, we're going to look on the back and see if we can cable manage them to keep them out of the way. So going to the back, so these three cables are the ones we've just plugged in. Now I'm going to route them all down this channel. So let's Velcro them into here initially. Okay, and then they're coming down into this one, so I am going to actually Velcro them into this one as well for now. And then finally down in the bottom one, we can Velcro them into there as well. And this just keeps everything nice and neat and cable managed on the back. So next, other things that we can plug in now, we've got a USB that needs to plug into the motherboard, and this is to give us control of the fans. So we're going to route that under. Now I know this is actually on the middle of the motherboard, so let's pop that through there and plug that in. So that's now plugged in there. Round to the back again. So I'm actually going to pull this cable into this channel here. Just means that we haven't got a straight cable coming down, like so. This USB-C, I'm just going to run this down and I'm going to slide it into the bottom of the case. We need to plug in our fans at the front, so you need to know where all of your fan parts are. These are 4-pin because these are addressable, so you need to know where all your chassis fans are, so have a look at the front. So having a look at where our chassis fan ports are, we've got one here, we have one down the bottom, and we've got one over here. Now this one's in a little bit of an awkward position, but I'll show you what I'm going to do with this. Now because this is going to need the longest cable, I'm going to use the top fan. I'm going to run it along the top of the case and out this little slot here. I'm going to pull that down and push that in there. Now I'm just going to push this behind the heatsink, just like so, to keep that all nice and neat. So next we're going to plug in the fan here, and I'm going to use the fan, the middle fan, because it's pretty much just there, and it's just a very quick line up and push on. And then the bottom fan, we run it through the bottom and plug in like so. So that's our case fans plugged in, we've got our USB plugged in here, we've got USB at the bottom, power switches, HD audio. Fantastic. Now if we look at the back, we're already starting to look a lot tidier. So we need to run these cables, and I think what I'm going to try and do with the ones going to the RGB is tie them up here so that they're coming down, this one as well, and then this one will just have to run along the bottom. So I'm going to do that. So if we get a zip tie this time. Okay, so we're going to pull it, but we're not going to pull it too tight because I need to know where these cables are going to route through to. I think then, yeah, if we can get them under this Velcro here, so that keeps them out of the way, This slightly longer one, I'm just going to loop under and put through this Velcro tie. So this cable is going to plug into the power supply, and I know that's going to be underneath, so let's put this cable in here as well. So all cables are nice, tightly managed. So once I know that these are okay, I can pull this tight and then we'll get that cut off, and that's all nicely managed there. So we've got most of the cable management done in the case now, so we just need to get the power supply installed and then get all of the power connectors connected. So to install the power supply, you will need the little power supply screws that come with your PSU. Now in this case, we're going to make sure that our fan is side down so that it's sucking air in from the bottom rather than sucking it from the warm case. As all cables are already connected, we just need to slide this into place, keeping all other cables out of the way. Once the power supply's in, you just need to line up the screws and screw them in. So that's our power supply now installed. Next, we have to connect all of our power supplies. These three are our SATA power, so we're just going to push them to a side for now because I don't need them just yet. What I am going to need is our CPU, which goes at the top of the motherboard. So we're going to do this one first. We're then going to need this one, which is our PCIe, that's for our graphics card. And then you've got your 24 pin for the motherboard as well. So let's push this just through the top up here. The connector is this 8-pin connector just up here. It's a little bit hard to see. Pull the cable through as much as we can first. Let's plug it in and then we can sort out the cable management. So that's pushed in nicely. So that's our 8-pin connected. Next, let's do our 24 pin over this side, and that will be your biggest cable on your power supply. So that just comes a little higher up. That comes through here. Again, pull it through as far as you can to be able to connect it. These cables don't like bending too much. They might feel a bit stiff, and this is quite a hard connector to push in, so you may find you need a little bit of force. Just be careful that the motherboard doesn't bend or break. And that is connected. Again, then we just pull the excess so that there's not too much on show to this side. Finally, our last one's going to be for our graphics card, but as we don't have the graphics card in there just yet, all I'm going to do is just push it through. I think we're going to have the graphics card one come through from here, just so that we know where the cable's going, and we can plug that in once we've got our graphics card installed. Let's go to the back and cable manage this a little bit more. Our big cable that's coming down here, I'm actually just going to push it underneath a little bit, let it run. Now with our CPU one, I'm going to pull that along this side. I'm actually going to zip tie it onto this side here. That's that one, tied in nicely there. So that's those power cables. So next, we've got these cables, and we only need one of these, and that is for this connector just here. This one is going to be powering our RGB hub, so we just need to plug it into any one of these. Plug that in, and there we have it. Everything's all plugged in. We're almost ready to go. The next thing I'm going to do is just going to tuck these cables out of the way behind the power supply, just because we've moved that drive cage and we've got loads of room behind there now. Nice tidy cable management, all nice, tidy and clean. And then looking from the front, I'm just going to pull this one very slightly. So next we need to install our graphics card into the top slot, plug it in, and then we can test the system. So we're going to take our graphics card and we're going to be entering it into this slot here. Now this actually takes up 2 PCIe slots. So that's not the top one, that's the second one down, this one and this one. So we need to remove these off first. So they should quickly unscrew. Any problems, get your screwdriver. You then slot with the fans pointing down into your PCIe X16 slot and push until you hear that click. Once you hear that click, that's all in place properly. We can then reapply these thumb screws. So next what we've got to do is plug the power into the graphics card. Now this one only has a 6-pin, so you want to use the main part, not the splitter that comes off, and then it's just the 6-pin that we're going to be plugging into here. So I'm just going to put those next to each other, and what I'm going to do with this one is I'm actually going to cable tie those together just to make sure that that looks neat and tidy. So that's all neat, and then we'll cut that off in a little while. And there we have it, the full gaming computer all done, all plugged in, all ready to go, sorted. So we've finally got everything all plugged in. I have used a HDMI port, a HDMI cable just to plug into my monitor. It's purely just this time to see if we get a post. So let's flick the power on. Now we've got a nice orange glow down here. I don't know if you guys can see that very well, but that shows that at least the motherboard has got power going to it. And let's try and turn it on. So we have lights at the front, the graphics card fans are going, we've got a post, all looks to be working. CPU fans working, all 3 fans at the front are working, lights are going. Fantastic. So look, it's been fantastic having you along for the build. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. If it has been helpful to you, do make sure you give us a thumbs up. Do subscribe to the channel. We are going to be doing a lot more, hopefully a lot more PC builds, and in one of our upcoming videos we're going to show you our next steps of what to do once your PC is at this stage, how to install Windows, what programs we would recommend installing, and taking it forward from there. So guys, thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.